This lecture is on types of taste. So taste, then, based on the information that is transported from the tongue and to the brain there are thought to be at least, and I'm going to start the next bit of this up here, there are thought to be at least 5 qualities of taste. And many flavors are made up of a combination of tastes. So various different tastes will then combine to make a certain flavor. So the basic tastes then are, first of all, sweet. So what we perceive as sweetness is usually caused by sugars. No surprises there. Usually caused by sugars for instance, that's a C there, for instance, the sugar known as fructose or the sugar known as lactose. There's another common one called sucrose, which is your basic table sugar. And other types of substances. And also activate the sensory cells that respond to sweetness. For for instance, some amino acids, and you recall that amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. Some amino acids and also some alcohols in fruit juices or alcoholic drinks. So although sweetness is a basic taste sensation that usually comes from sugars, there are some other things that will trip those taste sensors, and that can include certain amino acids, and it can also include then certain alcohols that will simply also interact with the sensory proteins for sweetness. So it's not so much a matter of tricking those taste buds as it is, or those taste sensors, I should say, as it is a matter of just there are certain other things that also interact with your taste sensors for sweet. That's the basis for artificial sweeteners. So that is one of your basic tastes, sweetness. Another of your basic tastes then is sour. And it is mostly acidic. Solutions. Like, for instance, lemon juice or organic acids that taste sour. So sour is largely a matter of tasting acid, but only certain kinds of acids. So this sour sensation then is caused by hydrogen ions. That's another way of saying a proton, basically. That are split off by an acid that has been dissolved in a watery solution. Basically, putting acid into water will result in some hydrogen ions, some protons that is being popped off, and those protons then are what interact with the sensors in our tongues that say that something is sour. And I should add that the whole business of dissolving something in water is pretty easy in your mouth because your mouth is wet. So as I said, there will always be that sensation regarding then things that are acids. Another basic taste is salty. And this is how we perceive, not surprisingly, salt, which is officially sodium chloride. It is a specific chemical, but this is what we use as table salt. But there may be some other salts, like the salts of potassium, or magnesium. So potassium salt is potassium chloride. Magnesium, I'm not quite sure what the salt that makes that magnesium combine, or I should say, I'm not quite sure what magnesium combines with to make a magnesium salt. But salts made of potassium or magnesium can also cause a sensation of saltiness. So in fact, if you have ever heard of a product called light salt, if someone you know needs to consume less sodium, then they are often told to buy something called light, but they like the taste of salt, then they are told to buy something called light salt, which is usually potassium chloride. So they get a sensation of saltiness, which they may like on their food, but on the other hand, they're taking in less sodium because your usual table salt is sodium chloride. Salts that are put into packaged foods will be sodium chloride. It's easy to get too much sodium in your diet, and this is a problem for some people, often people with high blood pressure. So they will then be told sometimes to cut way down on salt, specifically on sodium chloride. And potassium chloride, as I said, tastes sort of like salt as well, that is to say, like sodium chloride, and is sometimes used as a substitute. And light salt, as it is known, is usually a combination of sodium chloride and some potassium chloride as well. So then there is the taste sensation of bitter. And bitter taste then is brought about by many fundamentally different substances. So it's not as obvious as something like saltiness or sweet or sour, where we kind of, it does one specific thing and we kind of know what it is that it's perceiving. Bitter is a different matter altogether. Lots of very chemically different substances will wind up tasting bitter. So there are about 35 then different proteins in the sensory cells. So let's emphasize this here. Proteins in your sensory cells then that respond to bitter substances. So you put something bitter into your mouth, and there are many, many different proteins on the sensory cells that will wind up responding. So it's a much more sort of chemically and anatomically complex taste is bitterness. So from an evolutionary standpoint, that's an O there. So from an evolutionary standpoint, there were many different species of plants that tasted bitter. Some of which were poisonous. So recognizing which ones were poisonous was a matter of survival. So we have different functions for taste here. We have the stuff you need, like sugars, that also tell you if something is ripe. You have something like sour, which tells you that something isn't ripe. We have saltiness, which is something that we need. We sweat out salt, so we need to consume salt to replace that which we have sweated out. That's why salt tastes so good. And bitter then is actually a warning saying to stay away from those substances because they may be poisonous. Another taste, and it was also potentially useful to us then. Another basic taste sensation then is what we describe as the savory taste. So this is also known as umami. So this is the umami taste. We may also call it the savory taste. So this is somewhat similar to the taste of meat broth. And this taste sensation then is usually caused by glutamic acid or aspartic acid. So these two amino acids, and remember that proteins are made out of amino acids. These two amino acids are part of many different proteins found in food. So what are some examples of where we might find it in food? You're probably beginning to get an idea already. You can find this in meat, in cheese, and ripe tomatoes. All contain a lot of glutamic acid. So in many respects, when we talk about savory or umami, we're talking about a meaty taste. But it's not always meat. There are plants like tomatoes that can also, or plant foods, I should say, that have this taste as well, like ripe tomatoes. Also asparagus, it turns out. For example, contains aspartic acid. So up here we have meat and cheese with glutamic acid. Asparagus has aspartic acid. Those are the two different amino acids that seem to trigger the umami sensation. Chinese cuisine, that is to say Chinese cooking, uses glutamate, which is the glutamic acid salt, as a flavor enhancer. The way that cooks in other cuisines may put in salt or may put in sugar or these kinds of things. In Chinese cuisine and other cuisines, you will see glutamate being used. So this is done in order to enhance and make the savory taste of foods more intense. So it's a flavor enhancer. And that then is the end of this lecture on taste sensation.